6 weeks ago, I had a C-section.
A C-section begins after 20-ish hours of labor and 4.5 hours of pushing.
I have had 2 C-sections. My first C-section, definitely not planned. My second had an element of some planning, though I was hopeful that I would be able to deliver naturally.
I had a beautiful birth plan. I wasn't going to do any Pitocin, no pain relief drugs, anything like that. I really wanted a natural labor. I ended up finding a midwife and attempting a home birth. I went through 36 hours of labor. I had contractions from the very beginning, 1.5 minutes apart. So I never really had a break, and I was exhausted. Additionally, my midwife was trying to manually dilate me throughout because my daughter Soraya was sunny side up, which was extremely painful. They say it's one of the most painful experiences you'll ever have. They aren't kidding. But because she did that, my cervix had swollen shut. So
after a planned natural birth, waiting 10 days past my due date, and a very, very intense 30-hour labor, we ended up having a C-section.
I have actually had 2 C-sections. My first birth experience was laboring for a very long time. Start to finish was 23 hours. 3.5 of those hours I spent pushing to no avail. We just decided to go ahead with the C-section because my son just wasn't wanting to come down. 3 years later, we found out we were having another baby, and we already decided, when the time came, that I would just have a planned C-section. We decided to come 9 days sooner than we had planned. My water broke in the middle of the night.
I had a C-section with my first pregnancy, my first baby. I went into the doctor's office, my OBGYN, for a just routine non-stress test around my due date for him, and it did not go the way that they wanted it to go.
It was my second birth. My first was a vaginal birth. This time I had a low-lying placenta, which made it really dangerous for me to go into labor naturally, so we had to schedule a C-section.
I had a long discussion with my midwives and with my support person, who was my husband, and we decided that a C-section was going to be the best way to get my son out safely, due to some of the complications that had popped up, mostly while pushing, the amount of time since my water had broken, and how he was presenting.
So with my first, I discovered that I had a condition called polyhydramnios. I had never heard of this. It basically meant that you had too much amniotic fluid, and there could be some complications with delivery. They did tell me that they would want to induce me at 39 weeks. As someone who was very hopeful that I was going to deliver naturally, this was devastating. I knew the statistics, that if I were to be induced, that I would more than likely, as a first-time mother, end up with a C-section. So I went into the hospital for my overnight cervical ripening and was still hopeful that my body would do what it needed to do. I was started on Pitocin the following morning. I didn't sleep the entire night. It was too noisy. I couldn't relax. So the next morning, I think at 7 a.m. they started me on Pitocin. By midnight, I had not made much progress. I think I stayed at 4 centimeters.
That night, they decided to induce me, and I had contractions throughout the night, and then the next morning they broke my water. And somewhere throughout the day, I had gotten an epidural, which I knew I wanted for the pain with the contractions. And I ended up dilating to 6 centimeters, and all of a sudden his heart rate decided to drop pretty drastically.
Also had 2 epidurals that were unsuccessful, meaning they did not work. and I was feeling all of the contractions, which are very different when you're on Pitocin. With Pitocin, you don't get a break from your contractions. Normal labor, you would get, not much, but you get a bit of a break in between. Pitocin, they roll right after the other. And I was so exhausted that by around midnight, I was falling asleep in between those contractions.
I ended up being transported to the hospital where they then gave me an epidural, which I didn't want, and they gave me Pitocin, which I didn't want, and my cervix was able to open up, but at the same time, they had monitored my heart and my baby's heart rate, which they normally do in the hospital, and they kept flipping me over, and a nurse kept coming in to check, and they were like, oh, your baby doesn't like that side, let's flip you over. And I kept doing that, thinking that her heart rate would be better on a different side. And then all of a sudden, a couple hours from getting to the hospital, I had my doctor, I had several nurses, my midwife, everyone came rushing into my room, and I didn't know what was happening. The doctor tried to feel around for where the baby was. They asked me to push, and then my midwife whispered in my ear, you're going to have a C-section. And just out of instinct, I said to her, no. Like, that was not my plan. And she goes, well, do you want to live? Do you want your baby to live? I did not realize it, but at the time they thought both me and my baby were going to die.
They turned me on my side in all different positions, and just nothing was really evening out for him. Our doctor, her name was Dr. Brown, she was like looking at the contractions, seeing how he was doing with them, and decided to take a Kit Kat bar, go outside the room that we were in, and she was like, I'm gonna think about this while I eat this Kit Kat bar and decide what I think would be best. And she did that. She came back in, the Kit Kat was gone, and she said, I think we should do a C-section.
I was physically ill through the whole C-section, throwing up in a bowl that my anesthesiologist was holding while my husband held onto my shoulder, and both men were speaking encouragement to me.
I was able to have the anesthesiologist come over and give me a little bump because my right side had pretty much completely worn off and I could feel pretty much everything over there. I needed that, and they were able to calm him down and get me numb from the waist down, which is awesome. They started to wheel me out of the room. They gave my husband his scrubs and his mask and the little hat thingy, and they said, all right, we're gonna wheel her down, and while they prep her, we will come back and get you, except that did not happen.
And I just reached a point 19 hours into that false labor where they were saying I wasn't progressing. Baby's heart rate was dropping, and we needed to make a decision.
My husband wasn't able to be in the room with me. My midwife wasn't able to be in the room with me. Additionally, they had to put me completely under immediately. So it's like a dramatic movie. I felt like one single tear roll down my cheek because I was just nervous, and the amount of emotion that I felt in what felt like 2 seconds was extreme.
Could hear the doctors talking to each other, and my midwife was taking pictures, and I heard them pull Julian out and say, we have a toddler, because he was so big.
It was very smooth and easygoing, and was able to be with my child fairly quickly after they sewed everything up.
It took me a while to kind of find the space to mourn the loss of the birth I thought I was gonna have. It was difficult to kind of come to terms with needing a C-section.
Alarms started going off and things were beeping, and I just remember people being kind of panicked at that moment. I was panicked in general, and what I didn't know was that my body was going into shock, my blood pressure was dropping, and my son's heart rate had plummeted. They kind of wheeled me in, stuck up a curtain, and started to go without me knowing about it. The only person I had behind that curtain was my poor anesthesiologist. What he did not realize he was going to be doing was also being a support person for me. He was so great though.
I was so tired that I hardly remember what happened. I know I was very nauseous at first, and they gave me some medication to help. And I wasn't under general anesthesia, I was awake. I remember my son being born. I remember the pressure that I felt of them taking him out of me. But other than that, I fell asleep.
What felt like 2 minutes later, I woke back up and the room was completely silent. So I didn't hear my baby. I didn't know whether or not she was alive. So my first question was, is she okay? Like, is she alive? Is she okay? And she was.
He didn't cry at first. It took about 5 seconds, but those 5 seconds of silence were deafening. And my anesthesiologist was saying, he's beautiful, he's got great color, he's about to cry, he just needs a little bit of time. And sure enough, then he cried, and they cleaned him up and they put him on my chest, and I wept as I kissed him.
But in the end, it was the right thing for me and for this one at this time. It was, and ultimately it was really cool to be able to have both of these birth experiences that could not be more different.
They were able to get my son out safely. That is something I will always be so grateful for. Really, the end result that we all want, right, is a happy and healthy child.
I remember them coming back and putting him on my chest and looking at him for the first time. And that was a beautiful moment. So my second C-section was a completely different experience. I had the music playing and I was awake. And I was aware that my husband was there and he was holding my hand. I could hear the doctors talking to me and telling me what was going on and telling me your baby is about to be born. And again, I could feel the pressure as they removed him and as he was born, and I heard him crying, and it was just, honestly, it was peaceful.
The first one, I had been laboring for so long that I was just delirious and couldn't feel anything that they were doing. And the second time around, I was very awake and aware, and because I hadn't been laboring, and I could feel, no pain obviously, but I could feel what was going on.
They wheeled me back to my room, and my husband at the time had that first skin to skin. And she was beautiful. I didn't know whose baby she was because she didn't look like either of us. She came out with blonde highlights. And my husband is half black, so I thought for sure she would have some darker skin tone. She didn't.
That was the most powerful moment of my life.
My C-section was, just to think of some words that pop out at me, it was bright, it was very bright, and it was exciting and positive, and they were playing music, and everybody was making jokes and talking about what they were going to have for lunch.
That birthing experience, I didn't realize how much of an impact that would have on me. I did so much research before she came out. Labor and delivery is one of my favorite subjects. I watched documentaries. The Business of Being Born was my favorite thing. I watched it over and over again, and I was prepared to have a natural birth. I was really so excited as a mother to hear my baby's first cry, to get that first skin to skin. And I didn't get any of that. I had post-traumatic stress syndrome, and I, for a full month after she was born, because she didn't look like me, because she didn't look like my husband initially, I thought they had given me the wrong kid. I literally thought that she wasn't my child. Now she looks just like me, so.
I know that there are women who grieve not being able to have a natural birth, and I just wasn't one of those women. I was just so relieved. I did everything that I could.
Recovery is recovery, just like it is from any birth. It was hard. It was completely different.
The recovery started, and I kind of had some sort of idea about C-sections because my mom had 2 C-sections with both me and my sister, but I didn't really understand how crazy this recovery is. Those first couple weeks, I didn't get up or down easily. I had to get help out of bed anytime he cried. There's a lot of pictures of me sleeping on the couch and him in his little rock and play or whatever. So I didn't hold him a lot because I was in a lot of pain. I did take really hard pain medicine, oxycodone, and my husband helped me wean off of that because I relied on it for the severe pain.
You are on a lot of anesthesia, a lot of drugs afterwards, especially in those first 2 days in the hospital. They do taper you down, but you are on a lot. I remember one time I was so loopy and tired from the drugs and not really sleeping and breastfeeding that I was nursing my son one time, and I remember thinking I had dropped him, that he had fallen out of my arms, and it was the worst experience, like the scariest thing to think you had just dropped your 2-day-old child. That is how loopy I was.
My first birth experience, I had 2 recoveries because I pushed for so long. There was just lots of swelling and other issues, bodily function issues, and then on top of the C-section recovery, and we had a new baby, and we were just trying to navigate that.
For me, the hardest part was the recovery. I was in immense physical pain, recovering from my C-section.
You still have all the emotions, you have the recovery process, and at the end, you have these beautiful babies.
And I'm grateful that I'm able to have a happy, healthy baby, and she's 6 now, and she's sassy as ever. But my birthing experience was extremely important to me, and I was really looking forward to it. I felt robbed.
I don't have any regrets, and I don't feel poorly about the way that anything happened.
But he was healthy and safe, and that's all that mattered to me. I'm very thankful. I have no regrets at all.
So grateful that she came out and she's healthy. And I guess that's all you can ask for as a parent.
We, as mothers and as society, have to stop giving ourselves credit for having gone through labor.
Everyone's experience in labor and even in with this type of surgery is different.
Tread carefully when you're saying to a woman who's had a C-section, oh, that's the easy way out. You didn't really give birth. Or hey, at least you're not going to be stretched out. There's some really insensitive things that are said to women who have had C-sections.
It is not the easy way out. It is major surgery. It is extremely hard to recover from, not only just in the sense of the surgery itself, but the fact that you are also a new mother and you are taking care of a newborn. You have a totally different experience than recovering from, say, any other major surgery.
Absolutely. Giving birth. There are some who say it's not. I disagree. You are giving birth. Your body is being physically opened to have a child come into this world.
How much bleeding I would experience. I always thought when women talked about bleeding after giving birth, it had to do with the baby being pushed out. But I realized it's not just that, it's the insides doing something too. I hadn't thought about how long it would take for my organs to kind of shimmy back into their usual spots and for bodily functions to be normal.
I did not feel hungry. I did not really want to eat a lot, and the not eating is not a good thing. You need to be eating not only to recover from the surgery you just had, but if you're breastfeeding, you need to be having enough calories to take care of your child as well as your own body.
It's physical. You've just had major surgery. You should not be expected to bounce back in a week or two. You have at least 6 to 8 weeks minimum where you're under restrictions. I remember my first C-section, I tried to take a banana off the bunch without really thinking about it, and it hurt. It hurt badly.
Just really relied on my husband and my body.
Don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're as swollen and as sore as I was, as unable to get up from and sit down in and lay down in the couch or the bed, or even to stand in the shower as I was, it's okay to ask for help. It's maybe even necessary.
And I think we need to take that barrier away and give ourselves credit for just straight up being moms.
Sometimes I admit I have felt a little self-conscious when I'm surrounded by my friends who've all had natural births, and I can't relate to that part of it.
C-sections can cause moms to have not more, but some pretty intense feelings of like mom shame afterwards. I know that it took me a while to feel like I was a legitimate mother still. That my having had a C-section was still making me a mom, that I was still a mom even though I had had a C-section.
My first, I blamed myself a lot. I really think I had some birth trauma associated with that delivery.
You're going to experience a range of emotions, and that's okay.
Don't make assumptions about a woman who is recovering from a C-section. Give her space to grieve if that's what she needs. She may have a healthy baby, but that delivery may not have been what she planned or wanted.
Talk to somebody, lean on someone, and also acknowledge that your partner might have some emotions about that as well, because we know that it is a partnership, and they might experience some of their own trauma.
However you have come by your definition of mom, whether it's through a vaginal birth, a C-section, adoption, just life circumstances, if you call yourself a mom, you've earned it. You've earned it. And
Your birth story, your birth experience does not define your motherhood.
And so I've just kind of had to come to terms with that's okay. Like, it doesn't matter. My children are now 6 and 2.5 years old, and they're happy, they're healthy, and looking at them, you wouldn't even know how they were born. Like,
Help make her meals, offer to come over and clean her bathroom, step in and help her do laundry. Don't just say, let me know what you need. Say, what do you need? I'm coming over, and for an hour, and I'm gonna hold the baby so you can rest, or I'm going to clean your kitchen. I'm going to vacuum your floors. I'm going to play with your toddler. Just don't brush off women who have had C-sections.
And you are enough. Your birth story is enough. Your baby is enough. You yourself as a mother, as a vessel for creation and giving new life is enough.
I still got to have that special moment of them being born. It was through my gut, but they were still born.
Hope it encourages you or helps you.
You are doing great, Mama. Keep it up.